Hi, my name is Anthony Vanke, and I'm here to present our project, the Face Detector, and some of the conversations that we're having here in the Detroit area. I'm presenting on behalf of Brian Boyer, a colleague of mine at the University of Michigan, as well as Megan Atamala and Christian Wong, who are student researchers. Goes without saying, I wish I could be meeting you all in person in Taiwan. It's a shame that we can't be there together, but here's looking to the chance to actually meet each other and carry these conversations forward synchronously and in person. But until then, I look forward to this conversation electronically and asynchronously. We're very aware that surveillance technologies are becoming ever more present in our cities. People have put the banner on the future of cities as a smart city, where the idea of that technology would be embedded in our sidewalks, our streets, and our buildings. But tied to that is also the increasing kind of concern around surveillance. And these two projects represent maybe kind of opposite spectrums, where for many decades, since the CCTV rise in London to post 9/11 in the city of New York, these systems like the one on the left are becoming ever more present. Documenting with the cameras the movements of where people are, and different parties can tap into the system in real time to monitor activities in real time, be it traffic and transportation to policing and security. But increasingly, as devices like the ones on the right, this one is one that's in Detroit. This is actually a fairly brand new one, only a couple days old. But we've seen these in New York with Link NYC, which are also being kind of placed in London, Paris, and many other places. And there are a variety of vendors that provide services like this, but that in this are a series of cameras as well. And we can also have a debate on public versus private uses of data from the public space, but that's another conversation. Within the context of Detroit, however, in addition to these little kind of screen totems that are everywhere, is a much larger network called Project Greenlight. So I want to pull your attention to this blinking green light. And actually, more specifically, right under it, about a meter and a half down, you'll see this little camera. It might be hard to see in the corner. But that there's this little security camera. And what Project Greenlight is that it's a program by the Detroit Police Department where private businesses can pay to connect their store's camera feed into the Detroit real-time policing monitoring system, which goes into the central kind of mission control room that can be observed by police. But increasingly, this information is also being sent into a black box that is using artificial intelligence to do facial recognition to identify wanted individuals, to kind of identify them and issue arrest warrants. And so this is actually a map from the Detroit, computer is, excuse me for a second, by the Detroit Community Technology Project that has been working really hard to actually document the location of all of these cameras across the city of Detroit. And as I said, these feeds are all being kind of piped into this real-time control room that is in the city of Detroit. And this community is very aware of the kind of implications of using facial recognition, that we are very aware of the biases inherent in using this technology. And I just cite here an example from NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, that did an evaluation of vendors who provide these systems. I should say Detroit uses a private vendor called DataWorks Plus that provides technology and the algorithms that are actually doing the facial recognition. And NIST found that depending on the vendor, specifically black males are getting false positives at 10 to 100 times higher than white males, which tend to have the highest accuracy. And this has real implications. First, in a city like Detroit that is majority minority, there are concerns about what this means for policing, and then specifically in the case of an individual shown on the right, it has actually led to false arrests where he was misidentified. They thought that he was a person who robbed a notable store in town, and he was arrested while pumping gas. That gas station was connected to the Project Greenlight system, and he was misidentified, arrested, and the issues then kind of arose of how did the Detroit Police Department make the assessment to arrest him, and how was he identified? So it became a very problematic issue. I think the case is still in court right now, and hopefully he can receive justice. But of course, there are a lot of questions on who actually gets to benefit from these technologies. A lot of citizens wonder whether resources are being diverted away from services that may benefit the average citizen, as well as issues around bias and the lack of transparency, particularly when some of the images that are being used are tied to social welfare programs, as well as motorist licensing. In addition to kind of, as I mentioned, criminal photographs, and are, as a result, is kind of the database that these algorithms are using biased. But how do we have a conversation around this? And I'll just say, kind of as a very quick aside, these are questions that we're having in our program more regularly. We just started a program in urban technology, and this was kind of our time since clock, where you could only pull the plug once to start the clock upward. So this is when our program was only 21 seconds old, of how do we build a program around urban technology? How do we engage and allow for engaged research experimentation with students, particularly when these issues are complex and harms may be borne by students, society, individuals, and particularly marginalized communities, especially within the context of Detroit? How do we have a kind of thought out ecosystem to allow them to engage? So for us, we used ourselves as faculty members and a couple of researchers to engage in trying to see what are the implications. And some of our partners out there were helping us do this. And I'll talk about that when we talk about the face detector. But, for our goals, how do we build this infrastructure for them to build something? How do we allow them to think about the opportunities and pitfalls, as well as the lessons learned, but more importantly, without harming individuals and harms at large, physical, emotional, welfare, privacy, kind of all baked in? And how do we think through these logistical aspects? And I'll talk more about our lessons learned after the project. So let me talk about the face detector, but let me also flag for a second. Precision does not equal accuracy, which does not equal reality. And some of the screen outputs that you're going to be seeing from our project may not reflect reality and may be misidentifying individuals. So a trigger warning for some folks. So we were, as I said, we collaborated with a community partner. And how do we make this public? So we used, with our community partners, the Detroit Month of Design, which is a legacy project of the city of Detroit after it was named a UNESCO World City of Design. We worked with the organizers of this festival and several community partners and thinking about how do we engage with this. Again, thinking about how do we mitigate risks and harms. So after many conversations, we decided to maybe put this in the least interesting spot for the community conversations, but most interesting spot for fun. So we partnered with an ice cream parlor in the center of Detroit, which skews wealthier and whiter. One of the reasons why we made that decision is that we did not want to potentially exacerbate harms or ill will of marginalized communities, particularly when they're already over-surveilled and over-policed. We, for a variety of ethical and kind of our own kind of emotional considerations, we did not want to maybe engage in kind of in an area where these discussions are much more potent, particularly around kind of a festival, this month of design. So we partnered in an ice cream parlor and kind of scoped down to something that's more appropriate for the space. And what we did was, this project had two sides, the light side and the dark side. The light side had this cute, coy kind of game where people could come up and this algorithm would read their face and their affect, and it would overlay kind of a cute little ice cream emoji over their face. And you can see what we called the conometer, which reflects the emotions within a certain amount of time. And if it's net positive, digital sprinkles come down. The dark side, on the other hand, is on the inside, which shows the indicators through the eyes of the algorithm that we're using. So as I said, someone, can come outside and have a great old time and, have their face kind of measured, and they can play with the conometer and all of that. And so, here's an example. This was inside our building and not in the city of Detroit, using me as a case. So in a second, you'll see me walk in, and it'll read my emotions. And you'll see the conometer adjust. But on the right, on the dark side, you'll see that the algorithm is showing indicators and the confidence of my emotions. So if we zoom in specifically, so again, this is back to the ice cream parlor. You'll see that we generate an age and show the confidence. Gender, we use the binary male and female. As well as a confidence, and if it's a high confidence, we mark it in green, and then the emotions showing kind of what the computer system thinks it is. I'll say that the use of gender and age was specifically tied, and the kind of indicators on top, the bar graphs and everything, were tied to marketing indicators that may be of interest of stores, particularly because many stores are also engaging in this facial recognition for their own marketing purposes, so we wanted to do that. But here, there's an interesting case where the person on the left, we were able to actually talk with this party. This was during the Motor City Pride event, and this person on the left is a woman, identifies as a woman, presents a little bit more masculine, and you can see the algorithm misgendered this person, saying with 78% confidence that this person was a male, even though she's a female. She had a kick when she saw that she was identified as a child, maybe because she's wearing a backwards baseball cap, with 58% confidence, and then the emotions. And what became interesting is that with this group and many others, their understanding of the technology was much deepened by their ability to see how stupid a lot of these algorithms actually are. And this is where I said precision does not equal accuracy, which does not equal reality. So seeing that we're assessing someone as a child with kind of moderate confidence poses a lot of questions of how intelligent these systems are. And we're using kind of some of the best algorithms out there. But because some of these eccentricities of events, people who are presenting, with pink hair, a lot of the data sets that train these models do not know how to assess pink hair, which poses a lot of questions. But then I think this also poses questions of then what happens when this is used for policing? How do police departments make assertions of whether you are that wanted individual or not? As I said, we also work towards building kind of an infrastructure of understanding within our own program. So the text that we had in there tried to be didactic to people while also being brief. And to do this was actually a much difficult process because a lot of conversations happened when we went to IRB to get this approved. And IRB in the United States is tied to kind of ethical concerns, specifically tied to standards set by the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health. We are technically exempt because this is not a traditional research project, but we know that there are implications and harms. But our academic systems are not set up. So, of course, what did they do? They sent us to the lawyers. Lucky for us, we met with the vice president, the chief privacy officer, who is also the vice president for information technology at the University of Michigan, to talk through this. So we went back and forth and brainstormed with our community collaborators as well. How do we present this information? So we did many cycles of this text, but also if you go to the QR code, it takes you to a website. And we worked really hard to think about how do you present the data and where does your data go and how do we protect your privacy. So we actually walk you through the algorithms by following your video image and where it goes both within the computer and into our algorithms. And how do we deal with privacy? So our system actually resets every 4 hours. So we wipe everything as a last level precaution, but it's also, you saw the images that we had, the 6, and those indicators, those were only saved in RAM. So once you were out of the 6, we could no longer actually access it as ways of privacy. So we've tried to figure out, how do we talk about all of this with people, to try to help them understand, even kind of having the little flag of, this is collected anonymously and isn't stored permanently, but what does it actually mean, to try to have this conversation with folks. So some of the lessons learned are, the conversations are really different. And, I had talked about community concerns broadly, but we found that people actually were having different conversations and different concerns when we could see the technology. They were able to have a deeper conversation. And of course, we could laugh about how stupid the algorithms are. But they're actually quite knowledgeable. And I don't think we think about the public as being an interesting party, but they actually can provide a great deal of imagination thinking about the design of these systems. Over and over, they said that technology isn't the only enemy. They're very worried about the human systems and the black boxes attached to this. And a refrain that we heard very often was, they're worried that everyone is profiting but the people who are being surveilled. Companies, the police departments, DataWorks Plus in the case of Detroit. And for us internally, of course, as I mentioned, the traditional research infrastructure, IRB, legal and ethical reviews are not adequate. And that these conversations are complex. They're not just about technology. They're not just about law or society. They need to exist together. And students who can engage in that are chimeras. They're unicorns. And they're rare as a result in many institutions, including ours. So how do we facilitate that internally, especially with our community collaborators? And just to talk about that process very quickly, it was also difficult for us, not only in trying to build an infrastructure, but also doing this during the pandemic. And how do you do an installation while keeping everyone safe and everyone being on Zoom? And just the amount of people from the community, from the university, were actually required to facilitate this experimentation. But as I said, this conversation is deep. So this photo was from a few years ago between Representative Rashida Tlaib and the former police chief, James Craig, having an argument about DataWorks Plus and this facial recognition algorithm. One arguing for privacy, one arguing for security. But this conversation is actually very difficult because, although the question of who gets to bear the benefits, many of the businesses who participate in Project Greenlight are actually small minority-owned businesses. So this was an image from 2019 when Detroit celebrated, I guess, its 500th camera in the system. So in the foreground is the mayor, Mayor Duggan. Behind him is Police Chief James Craig, and then behind is Mr. Beydoun, who represents the Arab American Civil Rights League, who was there on behalf of the Arab American kind of community who are participating in this. So I think if we talk about who's participating in this, it's interesting that many of the businesses are Black, brown, minority-owned businesses, and there are many cited examples of businesses who decided to expand because they felt the security of kind of this system, having kind of the police department kind of providing an electronic eye, giving them confidence to expand, even though these populations are also the ones who are most heavily affected negatively by these algorithms. So the conversation is very difficult. And even kind of more recently in 2020, the City Council of Detroit, 6-3, approved the renewal of the contract with DataWorks Plus. So for us, what we're trying to do is now move into kind of taking this as an anchor. Again, the conversations were rich when there was something to talk about, not in the abstract, but that we could talk around. So we want to engage in a process of thinking about what is community-based technology. So actually working with community groups to think about how do we have a different perspective. So pulling from different literatures, for instance, our data bodies, thinking about these systems can move away from being exploitive of these communities. How do we build trust and rethink power dynamics with the technology and empower those who are marginalized, including those who are poor? How do we actually give benefit to the community at large? We're really drawing from this beautiful feminist AI philosophy. I recommend you reading it in full. Here are only 5, but how, again, do we center unheard voices? How do we have multiple touch points for involvement, creation, design, and testing? How do we involve those who are surveilled into the creation of the technologies, and how do they benefit from this information? And much like us looking at emotions or different expressions of ourselves through gender, colored hair, how do we center different kind of metrics to create data sets that are actually important to that community? So how do we move away from this kind of traditional means of surveillance to a community-based vision for these artificial intelligence technologies? And this is something we're launching very soon. So thank you for your attention, especially electronically. Learning from my students, it's much more difficult to pay attention to an electronic video than to an in-person one, but I look forward to the conversations. And thank you again.